Hi, my name is Travis, and this is my story. I think my addiction started back when I was a kid. Actually, um, I had my family life. My two of my parent my both my parents were alcoholics. My grandmother was very domineering in a way, and was always like, "You're not good enough. You know, you need too fat, too skinny, too this, too that." And it didn't help that, like, as I grew, I had a bit of an awkward phase. My didn't have that big of a friend group or anything. I just always felt less than. I was kind of told to feel less than, and I had nothing to like build up my own self esteem of any kind. Um, it didn't seem like life was really like getting any better. I just was bad at things, and I'd get bullied, and it got to a point where I actually thought about committing suicide because I just didn't want to deal with it anymore. I didn't think life could get any better, and I actually like made a little plan in my head, but I never carried it out, obviously, and I never tried or attempted. It was just always there, and that sadness and insecurity just perpetuated throughout my childhood, and I was always looking for something to make me feel better, something that would take away this kind of internal pain. Yeah, I was looking for something to fix me, some magic formula or something to make me feel better. And long story short, my friends and I started smoking weed and drinking a little bit, and I just immediately noticed like I just didn't care as much about what other people thought. I didn't care about what my internal voice wasn't so negative anymore. We started going to concerts. We started going and doing experimenting with other drugs, and moving on from there. And it made it so like my self esteem wasn't necessarily higher, but my ego was a little bit more pronounced, and I just didn't care as much. Even though I was, starting to use and all this kind of thing, go to concerts, I always stayed on honor roll. Somehow I just did school very well, even though I got in trouble all the time. But that's what started some of my self-destructive behaviors already. I started, acting out at school, acting out on my jobs, and dealing with the consequences. And as that was going on, my addiction progressed and my drug use progressed. Hallucinogens and stimulants and things of that nature. To cope with my ever growing, internal disease. So in school, I was always, me and my friends were all burnouts. We were stoners. That's what everybody called us. I didn't go to prom because I thought it was a superficial event full of superficial people. I didn't go to my high school graduation because we were on tour. Like, I just had better things to do. I had no, love for my school or my class or any of that kind of thing. I was using every day at this point, and had major difficulty staying employed, so my consequences started piling up at this point. I was caught stealing at my last job, or my first job that I ever had, and fired, and I didn't see it as it was my fault. It was always everybody else. So about 16, 17, my addiction started getting super heavy. I started taking Oxycontins, pain pills, and I remember when I first took them, I felt like my whole life changed. Like, the feeling I get was like crawling back into the womb of safety. Just, I felt nothing touched me. I was totally at peace. It was like serenity in a pill, and ever since then, I knew that this was the only feeling I ever really wanted. So me and a couple of friends got hooked, and all of our money started going to the pills. And pretty soon, I was at MCC at the time, and I'm using in class. I mean, I'm failing classes. I'm not doing great. I'm failing like stress management, even like the easiest classes in the world. I was just sick. I would anything to like not be sick. So I would go through, and I would be stealing from work. I would just to support my habit, I'd steal from anybody. I'd steal from my parents, from work, all this. I would start getting fired from places because I was scamming them, and my family, and it just became this ever moving. So as my friends and I are getting into this to oxys, our addiction is growing. My friend who was, selling us the pills that he got from his stepdad were, his addiction started taking off. So prices kept going up, and we couldn't afford it anymore. So I don't know how it happened, but we ended up going down and starting to buy heroin because it was cheaper. So we went down to Clinton Avenue and would buy heroin, and you know that was I never it was one of those things I never thought I would do. I told myself I'll never do heroin, and then I'd keep crossing these lines, and then as I started doing heroin, I said, well, I'll never shoot it. That is until I was at my friend's house and I saw him shooting it, and when he was using intravenously, and I saw how high he got from it. I all my qualms went away, and I asked him to show me how to do that. And at that point, my addiction, it was a nosedive, and there was no pulling up from that. That took me to new places and new bottoms and new lows in my life and in my addiction. I felt like I needed this to survive. I mean, like that's how much it had its hooks in me. And at this point I became completely unemployable. The only places I could get hired were places where addiction was rampant anyway. Some kitchens on bars on Monroe. Just places where it was okay that I was a little messed up, and or that I needed this because that's what they did. And it gets to the point where I had nothing. Like, I could barely scrape by any money. I'm running from my landlord and all this kind of thing, and not paying rent. And I used to go to my, I remember one time when I was just out in the open with how bad it had gotten, and I went to my mother and I said, Mom, you need to give me money because I need to, I need to cop because I'm going to be sick. I need drugs because I'm going to be sick, so you have to give me money. And my sister was like, what? Don't give him money. Like, what are you doing? And, like, who are you? Who have you become? And I mean, that was something that stayed with me, because I was like, really, who am I that I'm like, my mom is crying, doesn't know what to do. So she became an enabler and gave me money so I could go to work. That's when I had just full acceptance that I was everything I said I wasn't going to become, that I was just a junkie, gutter rat junkie. And that's like what I would tell myself, that this is who you are because you need this to survive, and so this is what it is. And eventually, I somehow got put into a detox. I think I just ran out of road, and I just had nowhere else to go. And my folks, helped me to get into a detox, and it was the first one. And I thought, this is good. I mean, if I could just not be sick, then maybe I could stop this. But really, it's just like I'm afraid of the sickness. I'm afraid of being, going through withdrawal. And so I went in to detox thinking, like, this is all it is. I just put down the drugs, and then my life will get better. And when I went in, the mental health doctor sat down with me and said, well, we're diagnosed with anxiety and depression. I said, and in my head, I'm like, of course I am. You took my only coping skill away, coping mechanism away, which was, using drugs. So it's like, of course I'm a little anxious and depressed. And so he prescribed me benzodiazepines because, this will help with your anxiety. And it just shows like how the medical field just doesn't understand addiction completely, that you're going to give a controlled substance to somebody with substance use disorder. So that didn't work out well, to say the least. So this began in and out of several different facilities. I would get clean in a facility. I'd come out, I would use. And my stepdad was actually a member of Narcotics Anonymous, or NA. And he would always try to get me to go to a meeting and just kind of tell me about myself a little bit. And, it took a while, but eventually I told him I'd go to a meeting with him. And, we went down, and, I walk in and everybody's hugging everybody and everybody's happy and laughing. And, I sit down, and I'm a little weirded out by the whole thing. And people start these readings, and, they're chanting along with these popular phrases in the reading. And I'm looking around like, this is a cult, like this is, I don't know what's in the coffee or something, but I was weirded out. And I look at they're using words like God and all this, and I said, oh my God. And I look at my stepdad, I said, does Mom know you're doing this on Wednesday nights? Like, this is like, it just really kind of freaked me out. But I was actively looking for the differences and not the similarities, because I wanted it to not work for me. Needless to say, I went out, I ended up relapsing again, and it got worse and worse. That's what I know is every relapse it got a little bit worse, and that's this progression of this disease. And so eventually I tried meetings again. I went back with my stepdad, and for whatever reason, it was that time. I met some people. I was a little bit more open minded and willing to try different things, and I was probably one of the younger people in NA. This was years ago, and so I latched on to these guys who were a little bit older than me, but we had a good time. They were funny, but we all related. We would go all over to different meetings across several counties, and it really just opened me up and actually gave me lit a fire for recovery for me for the first time. So this is when I started getting connected to the program and feeling connection with other people, feeling that unconditional love, and where I think my recovery started really taking off. I started putting time together, 30, 60, 90 days more, and I was starting to feel good about myself and feel good about where I was going. But addiction is a multifaceted disease, and if it's not going through drugs, we look to sex, gambling, food, mine was women based. So a woman walks into the room one day, and we lock eyes, and before you know it, it's just full blown love affair. And we sat here, and she validated me, I validated her. It turned out she ended up relapsing, and she was using and hiding, and when I found out she was using, I was completely distraught. But in the back of my head, I said, you know what, my recovery is strong enough, and our love is strong enough that I will save her, and I can bring her back. And in the end, she ended up getting me high before I got her clean. So, very sordid story. We ended up being homeless together. We were living in my car. It was wintertime. We were running out of money. She was selling herself for money for both of us. We were stealing. We were, ripping off drug dealers. We were staying with emergency housing at the Cadillac Hotel, and just not really sleeping, just kind of like existing there for a long time. And it was just, that was the lowest I think I'd ever been, and in my addiction to that point. And it didn't seem like we were ever going to get out of that. And then one day, she disappeared. Her family took her up and took her to a rehab, and I was just out there by myself. So I had nowhere to go. I was at the end of my rope, at the end of the line. So I reached out to my sponsor, and my sponsor ended up saying I could come live with him. So I went out there, and I started living at his house, and told him I was being clean. I would want to be clean. I really wanted to be. And at first, things were going really well. We were doing work together. We were going to meetings. Everything was fine. And then something happened, and I relapsed. I started using again. And at that point, it was no holds barred. I just ended up stealing. I robbed him. I ended up doing a burglary at another house, and the people who I knew, and they pretty much knew it was me. And the next thing I know, I'm getting arrested at my sponsor's house. I'd broken trust with the person who trusted me to live there. I had, and again, now I'm going to jail, which is another consequence piling up and another bottom. So as I'm sitting in jail, having burned all my bridges, I think nobody wants to have anything to do with me. I'm a scumbag loser, all this kind of thing, and nobody wants me or anything to do with me. The guards come up and tell me I have a visitor, so I go down, and I'm shocked. I'm like, who can this be? Because I know nobody wants to have anything to do with me. And I go down there, and there's my sponsor sitting there, and I was shocked, and I walked up, and I was like, what are you doing here? I've stolen from you and all this kind of thing. And he said, well, I'm still your sponsor. We got some trust issues to work out, but I'm still here for you, and I'm still here to work with you and do the steps. And that blew me away again to like this how powerful that program is and that unconditional love. When eventually I was released from jail, I started doing drug court and probation and all that, and I really got focused in on the program, and I really started working steps and doing everything, taking all the suggestions, doing everything that people told me to do, and my life got better. I ended up getting a year clean for the first time in my entire time of trying to get clean. And I got a year clean. I decided I wanted to go back to school for social work, and I enrolled for my bachelor's. I ended up getting my bachelor's degree. I got my master's degree. During that time of I ended up doing study abroad programs in Vietnam. I did my thesis in Tanzania. So here I am. You know, a few years ago, I couldn't get off of Clinton Avenue to save my life because my addiction had shrunk my world to this tiny, pinpoint. To now, I'm literally on the other side of the world doing work and valuable work that I think is important. So my when I went to Vietnam, that was at first through my bachelor's, and the professor who created the program was a mentor of mine, and he just I looked up to him, and he was just truly like an inspiration to me, and that the work that we could do as social workers, and when we were over in Vietnam, doing the work and everything, it was about. I had about 2.5 years clean at this point, and I was starting to get a little like slip about things, and I started eventually I started drinking, and didn't want anybody to know, and I kept that a secret from everybody, even when I came back to the States. And when I came back, I kept it a secret. And I celebrated time for 3 years that I didn't have because I was just so full of shame and guilt. And then I started my master's program, which took all of that. I didn't have to focus on that anymore, and I started going to Buffalo for my master's. Shortly thereafter, I went to Tanzania to write my thesis, continued drinking and using there, and then went back to Vietnam to live and work after I had my master's. So once I was back in Vietnam, now it was full blown. I don't have to hide it from anybody, and eventually, I started. I went down to this bar, to this club, and I saw this prostitute that was, her jaw's working like this, and I know she's on something, and I went and talked to her, and I wasn't propositioning her in that way. I was asking what she was on, and she ended up jumping on the back of my motorbike and bringing me down through these back alleys of Da Nang, Vietnam, to buy methamphetamines from these Vietnamese gangsters. And so I started using meth in Vietnam along with the alcohol and the other things. So once that started happening, I was playing music with a couple of bands in Vietnam. I was starting to use all the time. I was getting majorly strung out, and not sleeping and all this, and just my addiction progressed rapidly. Shortly thereafter, I got a call on Skype from my mom and my family, and it turned out they found a spot on my mom's lung, and at first it was stage 2, stage 3. Then it eventually became stage 4. Every time I talked to her, it got worse and worse, so I ended up flying home, and I left everything there, and I went home to take care of my mom. Stage 4 lung cancer, and metastasized to her brain, and it was a difficult time, but I stayed clean initially, and I got into a relationship with this girl. I started working with refugees back home, and things were going well until the relationship broke up, and I didn't know how to handle it because I wasn't really working my program as best as I could, and very quickly, while driving to work, I stopped. I turned down a street I used to cop on, and next thing you know, I bought heroin. I never planned it. I never did anything. I never thought I would use that drug ever again. But yet here it was in my hand, and we were off to the races again. So when I started using again, at first, of course, I keeping it a secret from everybody. I said, well, I don't want to start using intravenously or anything, but I mean, in my head, that's the only way to use. So I eventually went back to shooting, heroin and cocaine, and my addiction exploded again. All this money I had saved, all this stuff, it all went away. And that was something I thought, I don't really have a drug problem, I have a money problem. If I had enough money, I wouldn't be sick, and so everything would be all right. But that is not true because I had a good chunk of money and I went through all of it. And eventually that cost me, my addiction cost me my job. I got another job, cost me that job. My friends mental health arrested me at times. They brought me to a cabin in the woods to detox. I checked myself into 2 different detoxes and left both of them. Like, I just could not be stopped at this point. Like, my addiction was so rampant, and my defenses were so low that it just, I couldn't stop. And I continued using, and trying to make money any way I could. So one of the houses where I used to use at, I ended up getting connected with this guy who would, we asked me if I wanted to make some extra money, and we would do some scams together. So we started doing random scams throughout Rochester, and just for extra money and all this kind of thing. And he ended up calling me one day and said, hey, he said, you should come down to New York City. We have, we're going to make a ton of money. And I had literally nothing else going on because I'd already blown my 2 jobs and all this. So they wired me some money. I went down to New York City. I met up with a couple of these Jamaican dudes from Flatbush, Brooklyn, and they set me a plan, and they went and got me nice clothes and all this kind of thing, and we started doing these bank scams, impersonating people and pulling money from accounts, and making a good deal of money. And again, it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I always had to do more, and we did that several times. I was going back and forth from Rochester to New York City, and I'm telling everybody I'm doing fine, and I'm doing some social work consultations down in the city, and it's going to turn into this good job, and all this. And in my head, I'm getting more and more desperate. I'm feeling more and more paranoid, and I just wanted to leave. I was going to make enough money, and I was going to get out and go back to Vietnam or something, because it was the last place I remember being happy. And so one thing led to another. We ended up doing bigger wire transfers for $500,000, 2 of those, and cashier's checks for $80,000. One day I'm in Manhattan Bank, and they stalled me enough. I knew I shouldn't have been in there, and next thing I know, 2 plainclothes detectives are walking in to the bank, and I try to get out the door. They grab me and arrest me and bring me down to Manhattan booking. And I said, what had happened? Like, how did I get here? And that first thought was just like, I am in trouble, and I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. After they'd taken me down to Manhattan booking, I was there for about 24 hours. I'm starting to get sick and all this, and they come up and they say, I'm going to Rikers Island. And my heart dropped. I said, what is happening? How did this happen? And I was shackled to a guy, and I went down to Rikers, and the minute I got in there, I'm getting into fights and all this, and I'm kicking. I'm starting to detox badly. Even though they have a methadone detox program at Rikers, what I was using, this fentanyl, that was not exactly heroin. It just like the methadone wasn't touching it. I was just sick. But I got through that. I acclimated to my life at Rikers. I was there for about 7 months while my case was going on. The DA's throwing 5 to 15, year sentences at me, and I'm just thinking my life's over, and it's like, how did I get here? How did I let my drug addiction and my need to get more, get me into this situation? And through through my lawyer and a few other things, I ended up getting a deal, and I went upstate, and the deal ended up being a 1 to 3. I just didn't know. I told him I didn't know anything, and I went upstate, and from there it was from Rikers we went to downstate, then to Fishkill, and I had the remainder of my time there, and again acclimated to prison life, and just dealt with it, and hoped for parole after a year. The whole time I'm locked up from Rikers Island to Fishkill, the one thing that's going on in my head was I was distraught. Here I am with a master's degree and going through this facility. Like, how did this happen? And I would try to frame it in a way of like, well, look, I can go through the inside and kind of see how like the system works and all this kind of thing. I tried to make it as positive as I could, now that I started getting a clear mind. But the one thing that really stood out to me was that the people who continued to be there for me were people that I'd met in NA, my sponsor, my mind, all this. That like those are the people. They put money on the phone. They sent me packages to help me get through. They were always there for me, no matter what, through the whole process. Anytime I'd call them, they'd answer. And it just, again, it was like that unconditional love, that connection that just like, how do I still deserve this from you people? Like, how would what did I do to deserve this? Because alls I see is, this negativity that I put out. But they didn't care. They were just always there. And, so as I was about to leave prison, my sponsor, same guy who showed up, at the last jail I was in, drove, the 5 or 6 hours down to Fishkill to pick me up and bring me back to Rochester. And, again, it was just powerful to me and reinforced like where I need to be and who I need to be around in this life. So after I'd gotten back to Rochester, I was staying with family, and I started like this transition process started, and it was, I was only locked up for a full year, and it was still, the transition was very difficult. So I couldn't imagine people who'd been 5, 10, 15 years in there, and my heart goes out to those guys that are coming out. So I didn't know what to do. Here I am. I got my master's degree, but I also have several felonies and high class felonies on my record. I'm on parole. I'm thinking I'll never work in my field again. I'd screwed up at my other 2 agencies that I worked at in Rochester. So, but in the end, it's like I need money to live, and I'll do whatever I need to do. And I don't think I'm above anything. So I started working at this deli making sandwiches, in the South Wedge, and and that's just what I did. I didn't talk about that I have any degrees or anything like that, because I did feel some shame and guilt, and I always wonder like, is there going to be a way for me to get back into this? And slowly but surely, again, it was just like, leaning on my friends, leaning on my support, working towards just I'm gonna just kind of do the right thing for the right reason, keep putting one foot in front of the other, do what parole says, and work on myself, go to meetings, do everything that worked before for me, and and things slowly got better. So I started putting these resumes in where my friends told me of different places, and one of the agencies, I met with the supervisor and I told her my whole story. I was completely candid and honest about my situation currently and in the past. And instead of throwing me out, she told me to, she was excited and, wanted me to come work for them. And so I started working, at both jobs, the deli and this place, and I worked my way up in the one agency, from peer to evaluator to and they offered me the peer supervisor position and the senior evaluator. They took me on full time. I left the deli and I started moving back. I was moving back into my field again, and I was just blown away that people would take a chance on me. And again, it's like my head, that the diseased thinking I have is, nobody likes you. You're the worst. The insecurities will start coming out, and I'll start thinking like, all I am is a drug addict. But I'm so much more, and everybody who deals with this is, we don't have to be defined by our addiction, but by what we do in recovery. And, and I owe it to, all the people that have been there and supported me through all this, who had never given up on me, who never revoked my membership in the NA or anything and threw me out, or, the people who allowed me and taught me how to be honest, open-minded, and willing, and that connection that I felt with everybody, and then people that would like lift me up instead of tearing me down. And if it wasn't for them, I truly think that I would either be dead or doing a life sentence. But because of this program, I've had amazing experiences, and and I continue to move forward and thrive. And you know, and that's what I owe it to. You know, I owe it to recovery.